And then finally, feel free to introduce yourself to your fellow participants in the chat. Additionally, if you have questions, please put those in the chat as well. Towards the end of today's presentation, we will be posting an anonymous evaluation link into the chat. We greatly appreciate all feedback as we're constantly striving to improve. And then furthermore, if you are seeking a certificate or attendance certificate or CEU credits, you must complete the evaluation form as well. And then finally, before we begin, I would just like to provide a sensitive subject matter warning. So this training contains subject matter that may cause participants to experience strong emotions. We encourage you to take care of yourself during this training and reach out to your support networks for help if needed. And with that, I will give it to our first presenter to introduce herself.
Thanks, Natalie. Hey, everybody. Good morning. I am Leah Forney. I am the SAKI victim advocate, as well as the underserved populations policy advocate here at MCASA. Typically, you see me alongside my incredible supervisor and co-host, Laura Jessic, but she could not be with us today. And so I will be running this training. And so we're going to be focusing on the SAKI victim notification protocol. So just real quick, this presentation is covered by the grant fundings that is awarded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance of the Governor's Office Against Crime Prevention and Youth and Victim Services. And so as a subawardee of this grant, MCASA plays a critical role inside the Maryland SAKI project. And so we just want you to know that BJA and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquent Prevention, as well as the Office of Victims Services, oversees all our trainings here at MCASA. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about SAKI as an overall. And so the Bureau of Justice Assistance had a few things that they had in mind when it came to the SAKI project. The first section was they came up with some goals. And these goals were really designed to help address the growing number of unsubmitted and untested states, as well as prevent a future backlog for occurring. And so when the Bureau of Justice came together and they realized that here in Maryland, we had a huge problem because we had a backlog of historical states that had not been tested, they came together with some goals in mind on how to not only address this problem, but also make sure that we prevent any future problems from occurring. The second thing that they came up with was funding. And so with funding, they wanted to look at a few things. One, it was the inventory. So every law enforcement agency here in Maryland had to go through their inventory and they had to look to see how many unsubmitted or untested states that they have in their possession from 2018 or older. The second thing they had to do was discuss tracking. So here in the state of Maryland, they had to come up with a tracking system or a way to track these states to ensure that, again, they get tested and that we prevent a future backlog from occurring. And then the third part was testing. So once they've gone through their inventory, then it was on law enforcement as well as the crime lab to now come up with policies and procedures on how they were going to test these unsubmitted and untested states. Also under funding was the investigations and the prosecution. And so BJA put in a lot of funding to ensure that if there was a possibility of an investigation or a prosecution from these unsubmitted and untested states, that we wanted to do our job in making sure that we could potentially prosecute any perpetrator that is found guilty of a sexual crime. So they put funding into that. The other area that they decided to put funding into was victim services and engagement. And that's kind of where MCASA comes into play. And so BJA said, listen, not only do we want to test and clear this backlog, not only do we want to lead investigations and prosecution, but we need to make sure that we are servicing these victims, right? And so that's when they started to come up with the victim notification protocol and other policies and procedures on the way to best engage survivors. And then the last area that they wanted to focus on is expansion. And so expansion as in VICAP and ensuring again that we have the right victim services and the right tools in place and support in place for victims. Expansion around lawfully owned DNA has been a part of BJA's job when it came to the SAKI project. And then storage, right? So how long do we keep stakes in possession? Prior to BJA coming into play, Maryland did not have a storage policy in place. Now we have 75 years. Law enforcement has to keep all stakes in their possession and stored for a minimum of 75 years. So now I want to talk a little bit about the Maryland SAKI project. But before we do, I have a quick poll that I want to drop. And this poll is I want to know from you all, how many untested kits do you think we have in our possession here in Maryland? So I'm going to give you a few seconds to go ahead and answer that poll. Okay. I'll give it about one more minute. So I see a lot of people said about 2,200. We had a few that said 4,500. A lot of people said 7,500. And then we had some that said 9,400. Great. So the answer is 7,500. As of January 1st of this year, we have about 7,500 untested stakes in our possession. And so under the Maryland SAKI project, we came up with what we call the state committee. And the state committee is a state effort that is under the SAKI grant. And it came together to develop a plan on how we were going to not only utilize our funding, but what areas were we going to focus on. All right. And so under the SAKI project, using the state committee, we focused on the following areas. Again, inventory, right? So making sure that law enforcement went through their inventory and determined how many stakes that they had in their possession from the year 2018 or older. Testing and tracking, so ensuring that once we identified those stakes, that it got to the crime lab, we went through the testing process, we tracked to make sure that it went through the exact testing process, meaning they ended up in testing results. And we got victim notification, or we contacted the victim and let them know what was happening. We put funding into, again, investigations and prosecution. So any state that went through crime lab, if they identified a potential perpetrator or there was a CODIS hit, we wanted to do something about that. Training was also an area that the state committee decided that needed to be funded. And so training like this for victims advocates as well as law enforcement. And then of course, victim services. So ensuring that we are notifying all victims regardless of the testing results here in Maryland. So now let's talk a little bit about Maryland's victim notification development and how it came to be. So the notification protocol was developed again in collaboration with the state committee. And I want to note that typically the state committee includes MCASA, so a victim advocate from MCASA, our Safe and Start team. We also work with the F&Es, so the forensic nurses and law enforcement, right? And so the state committee comes together and they develop this notification protocol and as a multiple disciplinary team approach. Under the state committee, we also began to look at current practices used by other SAKI sites, right? So Maryland's not the only state that has SAKI funding, and it's not the only state that is clearing their backlog. And so what we wanted to do was look at what are other SAKI sites doing and how have they already been conducting their notifications and what can we kind of pull from and use here in Maryland. And then also, we wanted to have all SARTs in Maryland be a part of this process as well. And so all the SARTs in Maryland were visited by members of the state committee, especially specifically the OAG and MCASA, to again discuss development of the victim notification protocol. So now let's talk about survivor versus victim. And oftentimes, you will hear when working with individuals who have experienced sexual assault or rape, they may identify as a survivor or they may identify as the victim. There is no correct title for individuals who have been affected by sexual assault and rape. However, the criminal justice system typically uses the term victim, and this is typically the term used within the SAKI project as well as survivor. So you'll find that it's used interchangeably. So victim oftentimes may refer to someone who has been recently affected by the violence, particularly a crime like sexual assault, whereas a survivor may refer to an individual who's kind of gone through their healing process or are dealing with the short or long-term effects of sexual assault. It's important to note that when working with survivors, we recommend that you use the language in which they identify with. So if you're working with an individual and they identify as a victim, then use the term victim. If they identify as a survivor, then use the term survivor. So now let's talk a little bit about our guiding principles. So the first thing I want to talk about is what do we mean by victim notification, right? So in general, when referring to victim notification, we're talking about re-engaging victims of cold case sexual assaults, right? Oftentimes, these victims are left with unanswered questions about their case and their sexual assault evidence kit that has left them feeling like they cannot trust the system, as well as left them feeling like with a sense of anger and a sense of abandonment. So when we're talking about victim notification, that's what we're talking about. Notification is not a one-time event. So here at MCASA, we don't just call the victim up, say, hey, we have some test results, and then we're done. It is ongoing communication, it is ongoing support and advocacy for the victim and the survivor that we're working with. So it's important that we recognize the victim notification again goes beyond just an update. So we're not just calling them to say, hey, there's an update in their case. We're calling them to not only give them the update, but also to figure out what is it that they need in order to begin to not only rebuild trust with the system, maybe even create rapport and begin to get the support that they may have felt like they didn't get previously. The other thing I want to note is that oftentimes notifications rise both legal and psychological issues, right? Because during the notification process, we may potentially reactivate a traumatic memory. I can tell you, as one of the advocates on this project, there has been times where I've had to call a survivor regarding the testing results or just to get more information so we can test. And their feelings have been all over the place. They've had intense responses. Some survivors are feeling like they don't even want to talk about it anymore, right? Or they feel like they've been abandoned or they're frustrated with the system. So we keep all of those things in mind when we're doing victim notifications, right? The other thing is that notification will have a long-term impact on a survivor's well-being. And so, again, as we are doing this work, we want to make sure that we are reminded about this as we're going through victim notifications. The other thing that we do in our guiding principles is that we assure that we are victim centered. And so, victim centered is making sure that the victim knows that they are at the center of all the decisions, right? And so, here at MCASA, one of the things we pride ourselves on is victim choice, victim safety, and victim well being. That is the focus. And so, when we are contacting a survivor, whether it is from them opting in or we doing a cold call, we put the choice back in their hands, right? And so one of the things we'll talk a little bit about when we get into the types of notifications is that we give them preferences on how they want to be contacted, when they want to be contacted, right? And so being victim centered is the response that we like to take, letting them know that this is your choice. You can decide whether you want to talk to us or not want to talk to us, whether you want to work with law enforcement or not want to work with law enforcement. And so that is another guiding principle that we take in the victim notification. And then the third guiding principle is trauma informed. It is very important that when we are working with survivors and victims of sexual assault, that we remain trauma informed, right? And so trauma informed looks like that we're attending to the victim's emotional safety and physical safety, right? So it's making sure that we understand that we're calling these people. Sometimes they don't even know that we're calling them, right? And so because they don't know that we're calling them, we're catching them off guard. They may have or may not be ready to talk about it. They may not have even had, process it for themselves. They may be in a position where they don't feel physically safe right now, or they're around someone that doesn't know what happened to them. And so all of these things are going to be important when we are working with victims and survivors of sexual assault. The other thing we want to do to be trauma informed is we want to strengthen victims' capacity to recover, right? And the way that we do that is with information, right? It's with resources, it's with services, and it's with support, right? So we want to make sure that when we are working with these survivors, that we're providing them with the most up-to-date information that we have. We're connecting them to some resources, right? We're making sure that they're connected to local services, whether that's their local rape crisis center, if they're looking for legal services, our Sally team, or whatever other support they may be in need of. Trauma informed also looks like educating victims, but also educating service providers and the general community about the impact of trauma on survivors' health and well-being. And so all three of those things make up a trauma-informed principle, and that is one of the guiding principles we take when it comes to victim notification. So now I want to talk a little bit about conducting notifications. So here at MCASA, we have two approaches when it comes to how we conduct notifications. The first approach is active notification. And so active notification is practitioner to survivor. This is what we like to call the cold calling, right? So this is when we're contacting survivors to let them know that there's information to be shared about their previously untested kit, okay? Oftentimes with active notification, the survivor does not know that we're calling, right? So we're just randomly picking up the phone, randomly calling them, letting them know that we have some information. Now, one thing that I want to keep in mind is that when doing the notification process, it is not a one size fit all. So, how we approach each case is going to be important, right? The thing that I also want people to understand is that even though it's not one size fit all, every survivor deserves the right to know what has happened to their kid. And so this is the reason why we take two different approaches when it comes to conducting notifications. And then we have what we call opt-in notification. So opt-in notification is when a survivor reaches out to us, right? And so when they reach out to us, they're contacting us, whether that's via the opt-in hotline or the opt-in email, and they're asking us for information about their kit. Now, in both incidents, whether it's a active notification or an opt-in notification, what we tend to do is we tend to collect as much information as possible about what the survivor remembers regarding the kit, but we also want to find out what their preferences are, right? So whether we reach out to them or they reach out to us, we always ask them additional information about how they like to be contacted, when they want to be contacted, how often do they want to be contacted. The other piece is that we always ask them as well, do you want to be contacted by a member of the SAKI team here at MCASA, or would you like law enforcement to reach out to you? In most cases, we have had survivors tell us that they would rather a victim notification advocate from MCASA reach out to them versus law enforcement for many reasons. In some cases, we've had survivors say that they want to talk to both. And so we try to make sure that we schedule a good time with law enforcement and ourselves, as well as the survivor, to have that conversation. And so when we're conducting notifications, again, we have two options. Either we contact them or they can opt in and contact us. So now we're going to talk about when will notifications be conducted. But before we do, I want to drop another poll. And this poll is going to ask you, when's the best time to conduct the notification? I want to hear from you all. When do you think is the best time to conduct the notification? And I'll give you guys a few minutes. I'll give you one more minute. Okay, so we had about 53% of you all said before we test any historical kit, 41% said once testing is complete, and then we had about 6% said only if prosecution is being considered. Awesome. So the correct answer is once testing is complete. Now, there are some incidents where we might do before we test any historical kit. And that could be for a variety of reasons, whether there was like a waiver involved or consensual partners. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But typically, once we've gotten the testing done, once there's some testing results, law enforcement will reach out to us and ask us to conduct the notification. So in most cases, as I mentioned, notification will take place after testing has been completed. Victims will be notified of the results of the testing and what next steps may take place. This also includes cases where there's no DNA that was found or the DNA was ineligible for CODIS. This is also supported by research conducted by the In the Backlog organization, in which majority of survivors wanted to know when their kit was tested, regardless of the results. And then we also consider case by case when the case by case will also be considered. So there may be times where we might have to go ahead and test before we notify a victim. But again, that's a case by case situation. And for those who said before, what we have had in the past is that if there was a waiver signed, so a waiver meaning that this victim or survivor, went forward with getting a kit done, law enforcement presented them with a waiver basically saying there's a possibility that there would be no investigation of this crime, and they signed this waiver. What we have found is that when law enforcement was using that practice some years ago, that many survivors thought that their kit would still be tested. And so they found that the kit wasn't tested because they signed a waiver basically saying that they did not want to proceed with any investigation. And so in cases like that, before we actually do the testing, we will try to reach out to a survivor to say, hey, are you 100% sure of what you signed? would you still like your kit tested or not? The other time we used to test before or notify survivors before the testing was with consensual partners. Um, that was something we needed to do, which was to determine whether or not there was consensual partners around the time of the assault or not. We have since changed that. The crime lab, as well as MCASA and the state committee, realized that asking survivors that prior to testing is kind of not good practice. And so we stopped asking them that before testing, and we've proceeded with testing all cases, all kits. And then if we needed that information once we got the testing results, then we would go back and ask a survivor. And again, I mentioned that in some cases, notification before testing will be necessary. So again, if there's a waiver, or like I said, when we needed consensual partners information, but that has since changed. Okay, so now let's talk about who will conduct notifications. So I'm going to drop another poll, and this poll is going to ask you who should be responsible for conducting victim notifications. And I'll give you guys a few minutes. I'll give you all about one more minute. So 56% of you all said victim advocate, 31% said law enforcement, and 13% said the attorney. That's so interesting. All right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So, when it comes to conducting notifications, we take a team approach. And that team approach is that it is an MCASA SAKI advocate, so myself or Carrie, who's on our team, or Laura, and law enforcement. All right. So oftentimes what happens in the notification process is that law enforcement will reach out to us and they will say, hey, we got some testing results back for this particular survivor. We need to notify them, right? And so together we take this team approach to make sure that we contact the survivor, right? And the reason why we do this is because it provides an opportunity for not only the advocate to be present in addressing any psychological and emotional concerns and provide referrals, but also for law enforcement to be available to answer any questions regarding the testing or even a possible new investigation and any next steps. So we typically do a team approach when it comes to conducting notifications. Now, there's always the question about whether rape crisis centers can conduct these notifications. And the answer is yes. But communication still needs to take place with MCASA, right? So typically for rape crisis centers, what they will be able to do is like help determine any opt-in preferences. So if you're already having the conversation with a potential victim or survivor, you can find out from them, hey, how do you like to be contacted? How would you like us to communicate with you? Do you want us to email you, call you, text you? If we call you, can we leave a voice message? That kind of thing. And or pay attention to the grant reporting requirements. So typically with rape crisis centers, because they do get grant funding, there may be specific things that they have to do in their grants when it comes to victim notification. So you want to make sure that you're adhering to that, as well as any policies and protocols that have been developed in conjunction with MCASA and your local law enforcement. So rape crisis centers can conduct these notifications, but again, we still ask that MCASA be a part of it. So, how do notifications take place? That is what we're going to talk about. So, the first step is planning. And so, when we're planning, to do a victim notification, we're doing a few things. One, again, law enforcement is going to contact us. When law enforcement contacts MCASA, they contact us with a request to do a notification. The request should include why the notification is being conducted. So again, it could be anything from pre-testing where this was a waiver situation and we now need to get in contact with this survivor to find out whether or not they want to actually have their kit tested, or it's already been tested, they have testing results, and now we need to contact the survivor to let them know that the testing results are available. Either way, we plan with law enforcement. Once we have that information from law enforcement, then MCASA SAKI advocate will search our opt-in database to determine if this victim or survivor has already opted in, right? So again, when someone is opted in, they've given us the preferences on how they like to be contacted. If we determine that this person has not opted in, then we would move forward with our active notification. And so in both incidents, whether it's opt-in or active notification, we create what we call an individualized notification plan based on the information that we have received from law enforcement. And so this will have the most up-to-date address, up-to-date phone number, any additional phone numbers. That's what we will create. So we will develop this notification plan based on that information, and then we would send over a copy to law enforcement once we have created the plan. So the very first step is planning. The second step is contact. And so in this step, again, we're looking at one or two things. If the survivor has opted in, what are their opt-in preferences, right? So how do they want to be contacted? So we'll look at all that information. We'll make sure that we are contacting the survivor according to their preferences. We also allow survivors that have opted in to tell us when is a good time to call them and things of that nature so they can answer any questions we may have, or they can ask us any questions that they may have. If a survivor has not opted in, then MCASA and law enforcement will use the most available contact information to connect with the survivor. MCASA typically makes the first contact. If we're not successful with that first contact, then we will proceed to continuously try to contact that survivor. We may even do some additional research to find any more additional information, like phone numbers that we can try to contact them. If we have a successful notification, then we would proceed with letting the survivor know why we're contacting them. So in the example of test results, we would let them know that there's some test results available. We would ask if they are, willing to meet with law enforcement to discuss the test results. Typically, they'll say yes if a victim advocate is available, and then we would schedule that meeting with law enforcement to ensure that the survivor gets all the information they need. The third step is our follow-up meeting. So a follow-up meeting will be held on the preferences outlined during that initial contact, right? So once we have had that conversation with the survivor, we've made the successful notification, they're aware of why we have reached out and called, we will make sure that before we get off the phone that we have a follow-up meeting scheduled. During that follow-up meeting, an apology will be always offered from both the advocate and law enforcement. And we'll talk a little bit about why the apology is very critical when we're working with survivors. And so also during that follow-up meeting, law enforcement will discuss what the test results mean. They'll also discuss any next steps and empower the survivor to determine how they want to proceed. Remember, we take a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach with our notifications. The other thing that happens during that follow-up meeting is that the advocate will make referrals to appropriate resources, right? So whether that is helping them to get connected to their rape crisis center because they might want some counseling or safe programs, or if they want to figure out what they can do legally, we might connect them with our SALI team. Whatever it is that the survivor says that they're in need of, we will do our best to make sure that we make the appropriate referrals to the appropriate resources. And so the apology, the one thing that I want people to understand is that the apology is absolutely critical, right? So the thought process around the apology came from us looking at other SAKI sites and Maryland agencies, and we've all witnessed the power of offering an apology. The truth of the matter is the system failed these survivors, right? They failed them because they left them with unanswered questions about what happened to their kid. And so research has shown that many survivors feel better about the circumstances of their case when someone acknowledges the error that was made and how they were treated. And so survivors not only deserve an apology, but we have learned that survivors that receive an apology are more likely to re-engage with the entire system, including law enforcement. And so an apology is absolutely critical. So now I want to give you all just some tips for offering an apology. So, and as you see on your screen, for advocates, it's just as important to offer an apology just as much as it is for law enforcement, right? And so, really, the apology is validating the survivor's experiences, right? So, saying something like, I'm sorry for the pain and the uncertainty you've experienced after reporting the sexual assault. I'm available to support you and provide information for local resources that are available, right? Again, it's validating their experience. It's letting them know that what happened to you was not right and it was unfair, right? The thing that I always like to share about the apology is that this is not personal ownership. What we have found is that a lot of times law enforcement does not like to offer an apology because they feel like I didn't personally do it. But what I try to stress is that the survivor that you're working with could be anybody. It could be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be your daughter, a niece, a nephew, right? And so when you think about it from that lens, how would you want your loved one to have been treated, right? And that is why offering an apology is so important because what you're saying is again how you were handled, how your case was handled it was wrong. It was unfair and you deserve better, right? And so again, we want to make sure that we're not only being sincere in our apology, but we're acknowledging that the system has failed these people. They have failed the survivors and it's not fair. And again, we have seen that when we do this, it helps to restore that lost trust in the system and it helps to begin to build that rapport. So let's continue talking about how notifications take place. So step four is our empowerment step. So after we've had the follow-up meeting, right, the survivor will have an opportunity to learn about next steps, right? And so the next steps that we like to discuss is one, how do you want to be contacted moving forward? Remember, we said notifications is not a one-time event. This is not oh, we're just calling to give you some results and we're done. This is ongoing communication, ongoing support. So we ask them, again, putting the onus back on them. How would you like us to contact you moving forward? Do you want to hear from us on a monthly basis? Would you like to hear from us on a weekly basis? How do you want to be heard? How would you like us to contact you? We also empower them regarding the details on when and where the interview is taking place, right? So oftentimes we have had survivors that just want a phone call. Some want a Zoom meeting. Others want it to be in person. All of those things we empower the survivor with. So you tell us when, where, and day and time that works best for you. The other thing that we like to empower is how involved do they want to be in the investigation, right? Do they want to know if their perpetrator ends up being arrested and convicted? Do they not want to know, right? All of that we ask and we empower them. You tell us how involved you want to be in this investigation. And then the other thing we also want to ask and empower around is any mental health services or legal services. Do you need to be connected to those things, right? And if so, as the advocate, we would do our best to make sure that we connect them to those resources. The other component to empowering them is offering a survivor an opportunity to speak privately to an advocate or law enforcement. What we have found is that oftentimes survivors will not talk to law enforcement without an advocate present, right? Or we've had some cases where survivors will say, I don't need an advocate present. I just want to talk to law enforcement. And if that's the case, then we do our best to get them scheduled with law enforcement and let law enforcement know that this will be a private conversation between yourself and the survivor. But no matter what, we're empowering the survivor on what they need to do for their next steps. So before we go into step 5, I'm going to drop our last poll. And this poll is, in your opinion, what is the most important piece of notification? So I want to hear from you all what you think is the most important piece of notification. And I'll give you guys about 1 more minute. Okay. So 81% of you all said allowing survivors to opt in or opt out. Okay. And 19% said the apology. Awesome. Well, let's talk about it. So, one of the things that we have found that helps us to determine what is that best approach or the best part of the process when it comes to notifications is what we have started doing, which is step 5, and that is our survey. And so at the time of the follow-up meeting, all survivors will be asked if they would be willing to take a survey about their experience at a later time. And so if they say yes, then MCASA will contact the survivor to conduct the survey. And so this survey is really designed to gather as much information as possible to not only help us with any future changes to our protocol, but also to highlight any areas that we may have overlooked, right? And so one of the questions we asked in the survey was like, was an apology issued, right? We want to know that. We want to know whether or not law enforcement is following the protocol and issuing that apology or not issuing that apology. Um, and also, we want to know things like, what was your experience like? Right? Did you have, what was it like with the victim advocate? What was it like with law enforcement? These things help us to, again, continue to make any necessary changes to our protocol, but also highlight those areas that we may not be paying attention to. Um, One thing I want to note is that SAKI as a whole is new territory, right? It is absolutely new territory. And so you're going to see the changes being happening. You're going to see that as we learn more information, we're going to make the tweaks as necessary. This is new to the state of Maryland. It's new to a lot of states. And so a lot of things we learn through testing and trying. So now I want to talk a little bit about the local SARP involvement. So here at MCASA, again, we take a team approach. It is a collaborative approach. It's a multidisciplinary approach. And so one of the things that we made sure that law enforcement had is a SART team, right? And so our SART teams come together to discuss what survivors impacted by SAKI may need. We also come together to discuss or determine how we can meet those needs, right? We also come together so that we can get an understanding of the protocol, and not only get an understanding of protocol, but understand that we're working together with MCASA and law enforcement to make sure proper referrals are made. And we encourage team members to look at your numbers and your cases with open eyes. The beautiful thing of the local SART team is that oftentimes law enforcement has found that if they're feeling stuck in a case, right, that's SAKI specific, they can go to these SART teams that meet on a regular basis and ask a member of the SART team to review this case and kind of give them feedback on the best ways to um, approach the notification process for this particular case. The other thing is that, again, MCASA is involved. So because we're involved, we help out a lot of times with we help a lot of times with this notification process with law enforcement, and we try to again keep that multiple disciplinary team approach. So now I want to share some exciting things that has happened since the SAKI project has been rolling out. And so we're going to talk a little bit about two new things that is very new under the Maryland SAKI project. One of them I helped create, and so I'm super excited to share it with you all. And so the first thing is our Maryland SAKI Impact Map. So the Maryland SAKI Impact Map is something that I actually helped create. It was my idea. And so I wanted to create a mock-up of what is happening in Maryland, right? And so one of the things when I came on board as a SAKI advocate, I was big on making sure that the community at large was aware of what was happening in Maryland when it comes to the backlog of unsubmitted and untested SAKEs, right? And so myself, Laura, and our amazing comms person came together and we created the Maryland SAKI Impact Map. And so this map is available on MCASA's website. You can go on our website and actually look at the map. And so the map is created for a few reasons. One, it was designed to bring awareness about the SAKI project to the community at large, right? We know about it at MCASA, other service providers, rape crisis centers, law enforcement, other victim advocates know about it. But oftentimes, the community at large doesn't know, right? And so I was like, how can we get this information about what is happening in Maryland to the community? And so the picture of the map that you all see is actually what the map looks like. And so when you go to MCASA's website, you'll be able to hover over any of those little points, and it will tell you how many kids are currently in that county and how many have actually been tested, right? And so this is some great information. So if you're in Prince George's County or Charles County or Anne Arundel County, and you're like, I just want to know what's happening in my county, you can get that information. The other thing that the map is designed to do is it is designed to allow survivors and the community to know again what's happening in their community, right? Like I don't know about anybody else, but when I used to live in Charles County, I always wanted to know what was happening in Charles County, right? So this map is designed for people to know are my law enforcement agencies actually doing what they said that they were going to do? Who's actually testing? Who's not testing, right? That is what this map is designed to do. The third thing is that it is designed to foster accountability between the public and law enforcement to ensure that we clear this backlog and we prohibit any other backlogs, right? And so it is my hope that when survivors and the community start to see this map, that they hold law enforcement accountable. If you go on the map and you see that there's an agency in your community that's not testing, that you hold them accountable, that you write them or call them and say, hey, what's going on? Right? That is our hope. But as much as we want to hold them accountable, it's also been designed for the fourth reason, and that is to create an opportunity to highlight those agencies that are working effortlessly on behalf of victims who were impacted by this backlog. Because we do have some agencies that are effortlessly doing their part. And so, as much as there's accountability, we also want to shine the light on those that are doing the incredible work. And so, again, if you go to MCASA.org, you will be able to find the link to our map. And I hope you guys go and check it out and see what is happening throughout the state of Maryland. So that's one new thing under the Maryland SAKI project. The second thing that I want to talk about is our track it system. So, as I mentioned before, one of the things that BJA put funding into is a tracking system. And so I am happy to announce that we now have our SAKE track it system. It is now up and running, right? And so if you work in the following professions, you will be required to participate in the use of the statewide sexual assault evidence kit tracking system. So that's law enforcement agencies, SAFE programs, state attorney's office, and crime labs. Now, the beautiful thing about this system is that victims and survivors of sexual assault will have access to the victim portal. And so they will be able to track the progress of their kit throughout the testing process as well. So victims and survivors will know, as well as those statewide sexual assault agencies that work with them. And so I've had the pleasure of kind of checking it out before it went live. It is definitely very user friendly. It's exciting that we have this. I think that going forward, this system will not only be able to allow survivors to track those historical kits. So again, any SAKI kit 2018 or older will be in this system, but also any kits collected moving forward will be in the system. And so a victim of sexual assault, when they go get their SAKE done, they will be provided this information on how they can track the testing process going forward. So we are making some really great progress, y'all. So as we get closer to wrapping this up, I want to share a little bit about what we can do or what you can do to help, right? So there's a few things that you all can do to help us. One, definitely share the protocol with your member agencies. So if you work in law enforcement, if you work in the Rape Crisis Center, if you work in the crime lab, make sure that the victim notification protocol is shared amongst your agency. Of course, definitely share the link to the Maryland SAKI Impact Map. Again, you can go right on MCASA's website and find it and share it out. The other thing, the other thing that you can do is post the opt-in line information, right? So you can make sure that you post it to your agency's website, social media accounts, but spread the word about this opportunity to opt in. Definitely work towards ensuring that your SART meets those COMAR regulations. So if you are running a SART or a part of the SART, make sure that you are adhering to COMAR regulations and requirements. And then also conduct outreach to agencies that may not actively be involved, right? So MCASA can definitely help with outreach for non-participating agencies. We have started doing that. We've started reaching out to those law enforcement agencies who are not participating to ensure that they get back on track, offering technical assistance, letting them know that we are here if they need help with their inventory. And then, of course, if you are one of those agencies, participate in the track it system. Again, it is user friendly, and I'm sure that you all will get some information and guidance on how to best use it. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to let Natalie share her screen. We always like to play a survivor story with this training. You may recognize this person when you see them. And so again, it's been an honor to serve you all. So I'm going to pass it over to Natalie so she can pull up the survivor story.
Good. Thanks, Leah. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and I'll optimize for video clip. If anyone has any trouble hearing or anything, um, just let me know. So, okay, that should be good. Are you all able to hear the video? Okay, I'm getting some messages that the video is a little quiet. I'm sorry about that. So I'm going to try to stop sharing and reshare, and then hopefully that helps. We will see. I'll optimize again for video clip. Hopefully this works a bit better.
Because I knew the person. And so, just statistically wise, I want somebody to hear this, that 9 out of 10 victims of rape are female. 55% of sexual assault occur at or near the victim's home. 8 out of 10 rapes occur by someone the victim knew. 39% of those rapes are committed by an acquaintance, and 33% of those rapes are committed by either a current or former spouse, boyfriend, and or girlfriend. Now, you're probably saying, why does that even matter, right? And that is because as a thriver of sexual assault, I fell into those statistics. And because I fell into those statistics, I felt that my case was mishandled because law enforcement did not believe that because I knew the person, had a casual dating life with that person, that they could not have raped me, right? And so, just a brief synopsis of my story. I met my perpetrator after living in the state of North Carolina for 2 years. We met at a car rental place. He was working at the car rental place at the time. I happened to be there because I was looking to rent a car due to my car breaking down. Right? He was very charming. He was very sweet. We engaged in conversation. When I decided not to get the car rental, he offered to drive me home, hence, he knew where I lived. He even offered to take me to dinner, hence, he was charming, right? So, after about 1 or 2 dates with this individual, I decided not to see him anymore. But he was always around. He was always around and he would always randomly pop up in places where I was. It was almost as if he had a GPS on me, right? January 27, 2013, he randomly calls me, right? When he randomly calls me on that specific day, I happen to be in a very emotional state because I just got off the phone after receiving a phone call of a loved one passing. So when he calls me that day, I'm already an emotional wreck. He offers to come over and console me. And against my better judgment, I allow him to. Little did I know he was already sitting outside my apartment. So he comes to my house again under the guidance of I'm here to support, here to comfort you. But the minute he walked in my unit, something just did not feel right. There was this gut wrenching feeling on the inside of me that said something is not right. He sat on my couch and instead of consoling me, he proceeds to want to argue about why I no longer wanted to deal with him. I asked him to leave. And as he pretended to leave, he immediately grabs me and proceeds to rape me right there in my apartment. Now, you can imagine, and that's just a brief synopsis of what happened on that day. You can only imagine the emotional turmoil, the physical turmoil, the upset, the fear that I was in that moment in time in my life. And because of that, I really wanted to share just that synopsis so you can understand how difficult this is when you're encountering a victim or a survivor or a thriver of sexual assault. Not many of them have what I like to call the resiliency factor. For me, I was able to bounce back. I was able to get the support, go to therapy, rely on my family, rely on my friends, rely on my spirituality and God to get me through. So many of them don't have that opportunity. And so I wanted to leave you guys with an understanding of how to look at victims. I think many times when we encounter a victim, whether it's of sexual assault of any crime, we immediately think that this individual is weak. And we're not weak. We may be in a weakened state because emotionally are trying to process all that we feel and all that is coming to us, but we really want to be empowered. We really want to make the right decision for us in order to get through what it is that we're facing. And so, every victim, survivor, or thriver of sexual assault needs the following from law enforcement or anyone that they come in contact with, right? And so the V in victim stands for validation. Put yourself in their shoes. What if that was your daughter? What if that was your mom? What if that was your aunt? What if that was your uncle? Put yourself in their shoes. Empathize with them. Listen to them. Offer an apology. And let me say, the apology is not coming from a personal place. We're not saying you have to personally take responsibility for what happened. But what we are saying is, hey, it would be nice to say, you know what? We dropped the ball. I am sorry. So offer an apology. Validate what it is that we're feeling. Validate what it is that we're experiencing. The I in victim stands for insight. Don't be afraid to provide them with resources and information about the process from beginning to end. One of the things I wish the state of North Carolina did was give me insight. It's a lot of information that I found out 8 years later after my rape kit was tested that I wish I knew 8 years ago when I was going through this process. And so, because I didn't have the insight, I didn't know what the process was going to look like. I didn't know that after the rape kit comes, then I have to go through the notification process and have to meet with the DA. And I didn't know these things. So, provide the insight, give them the resources. And if you don't know, connect them to somebody that does know so that they feel like they can make a very informed decision about what it is that they want because this is their choice. The C in victim stands for compassion. Again, be a listening ear. They're not trying to beat you up. They're not trying to blame you for what has happened. They just want to be heard. We just want to be heard. And again, I can only share from my experience. I wish that I was heard. I wish that I didn't have to stand in front of, and I'll share when I encountered law enforcement, the officer literally asked me 7 times, was I sure that he raped me because I knew him? 7 times I counted. That's not being compassionate. If I tell you that that's what it was, then you compassion is believing me enough to say, okay, this is we'll take the report. We'll do what we have to do to support you. So be compassionate. The T in victim stands for timely. Provide them with timely and up to date information regarding their case. I shouldn't have to wait 8 years to find out that the DNA test came, like it was a DNA match on my rape kit. That to me, that's an injustice. So provide them with timely information. Let them know, hey, this is where we are in the process. This is what needs to happen next. This is the part we need you to play. Again, giving them, taking them on that journey with you, step by step together. It's a partnership. And I know law enforcement a lot of times get a bad rap, but you want to know how we can build that bridge? It's to partner together with the victim, the survivor, or the thriver. Because we don't know what's best for us, but the more insight we get, the more we can make an informed decision. The I in victim stands for instruction. Again, be willing to guide them through this process. Be willing to as they make a decision. And let me tell you, the decision is very hard to make. It is not a you wake up the next day and boom, I want to go ahead and prosecute. No, it's very hard to make. And so give that space. Be willing to be as patient as they need you to be during this process. Ask them, how can I support you in making this decision? Because again, it is not that easy to make. As someone who just had to make that decision again 8 years later for my rape kit, it wasn't easy. I went back and forth with my support system. I went back and forth in my mind. I went prayed about it. I talked to my therapist about it. I did all these things to process just to make the decision. So again, be willing to guide them, be willing to hold their hand, be willing to support them in making that decision. And then the M in victim stands for mindfulness. Always keep in mind that you are encountering somebody's child, somebody's friend, somebody's colleague, somebody's sibling, somebody's parent. So practice mindfulness. Again, we want to work with law enforcement because we don't understand this process. But it's very hard to do when we encounter law enforcement to be cold or don't believe us. I'll tell you, I got raped on a Sunday. I didn't report it till a Tuesday. And it's because of my fear that nobody was going to believe me. It was because of my shame of this. I allowed this to happen because I let him in my house. So unless you have experienced it for yourself, you're not going to understand how difficult this really is. And so, in closing, I just really want you guys to begin to think of the word victim in a different way. It's no longer the definition that we're used to. It really is providing practical steps that you can take when you're encountering any victim of a crime. Okay. And again, that is to validate, that is to give insight, that is to be compassionate, that is to provide timely information, give instruction, and of course, be mindful. And so, again, I thank you guys for allowing me to really be a part of this training. And I hope that you guys take this information with you, hearing it directly from a thriver of sexual assault, that this is what we need in order to work successfully together when dealing with sexual assault cases.
All right.
Thank you, Natalie, for playing that. So to conclude today, I want to leave you all with my contact information. So if you need to reach me for any reason, or Laura, feel free to email Laura at ljessica@mcasa.org, or you can email me directly at lforney@mcasa.org. Again, thank you so much for being with us today for day 6 of our SAVAT training. And I'm going to kick it over to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Leah. In a few moments, I'm just pulling it up. I'm going to share our evaluation for this training in the chat that we will just have you all complete if you need a certificate attendance or anything like that. So give me one moment. So that's shared in the chat. That will also be sent out via email. So please take a few moments to fill that out as well. And just as a reminder, if you're seeking a certificate of attendance or a certificate for CEU credits, you need to complete that evaluation form. And then upon submitting the evaluation form, you will see a box at the top of your webpage containing a link. And if you click that, it will take you to the certificate request form. I believe that is all we have for you today. Thank you all for bearing with me as I filled in this morning for Alyssa as she was out. But if you have any questions, just please feel free to reach out to either any of the emails on the screen or MCASA's general info account email, which is also shared on the screen as well. And we will see you all tomorrow.